Welcome to the Nightbird Radio Podcast. I'm Timothy Saylor, and I'm going to be your host this evening as we sound out the subconscious, navigate the nocturnal, and explore the farthest reaches of our experience. Coming at you from the back of an 86 Dodge Ram van on the rolling foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains in the Great Forest, deep in the heart of the Kali Yuga. This is radio for the hauntological turn. This episode of the Nightbird Radio Podcast was brought to you by SB. If you'd like to support the show and hear your name or a cryptic message in lieu of your name read at the top of the next episode, head to nightbirdpodcast.com and navigate to the Support the Show page. Thank you so much for your generous support. You keep this show going. And remember to subscribe to this show wherever you listen to your podcasts and give me a 5-star rating. That helps a lot. I'm also on Instagram at Nightbird Podcast, on YouTube at Nightbird Podcast, on Mastodon at Tim Saylor at Numinauts.club, and on Telegram at t.me/NightbirdRadio. And welcome back, Nightbirds. It's great to have you back, and it's great to be back. This week I was joined by Mel Priestley and Jack Steiger for a look ahead at the Astrology of 2023. So without further introduction, let's get to the forecast. Mel Priestley and Jack Steiger, welcome to the Nightbird Radio 2023 Astrology Forecast. How are y'all doing?
Doing great, Tim. How are you?
I'm doing great, Jack. How are you doing?
I'm feeling quite good. Slept in. I'm feeling quite cognitively enhanced with all the caffeine. So looking forward to today.
Before we jump into it, how has the space weather been for y'all lately?
Well, I was just complaining about the Mars retrograde in Gemini, which is having very Mercury ret type qualities for me personally and for people around me. Lots of tech issues, lots of communication breakdowns, lots of things not arriving in the mail, which I mean, it's Christmas time,
I'm
so
having
that kind
that.
of happens, but yeah.
I've actually found this lunation that we're in quite auspicious. It's just been quite nice. Just the ambient feeling of hope and optimism, which I think comes from Jupiter and Pisces, has just been quite good. I wasn't expecting it to be this pleasant, but I found this Sagittarius lunation to be really just, I don't know, I just feel good. And I'm trying to ride the vibe for as long as I can.
Yeah, I feel like, and I've seen it too, in my friends and the people that are kind of aware of this. I seem to have noticed that a lot of people have mentioned that it seems like something came unstuck, like some energy shifted or something. Does that track with y'all? And it's been this past week, and even for me too, it's great. And then I got a cold, but even still, I'm doing, yesterday I was feeling the worst I felt in this cold, but I still edited a whole podcast and got it out and did all my promotional stuff.
Yeah. So the full moon earlier this week, which was conjunct Mars, which did either of you go look at it? Because Mars went right behind the moon. It was actually pretty cool. It felt a little spicy. So the thing about, for me, the way the Mars is landing in my chart, and then with the full moon there, this Mercury retrograde, it's Mars is making me want to burn out, and he's often winning. So I have been feeling just super overworked, and it's kind of like a good overwork because I've had a lot of opportunities and work projects coming at me that I'm taking because they're opportunities and there's money and stuff. But I'm very aware that they spiral out of control very quickly, like all of them. And then I'm like, oh my God, it's way more work than I intended to be. And I have 5 of them on the go. I better cool it because that way leads to burnout and getting sick and things. So I'm so far I'm on the cusp. But in terms of coming unstuck, I'm not sure I've noticed that yet. But that could also be just how it's hitting me personally. I'm just feeling honestly work.
Mm. Yeah, in terms of unstuck, I think it's potentially, for me, it was coming out of eclipse season. And because we headed from a very bad moon to a very good moon, like this new moon in Sagittarius that we had end of last month, I found was in quite good condition. So it could just be just that contrast, because like, eclipse season is just so, just kind of sickly and malefic, and it could just be like, getting out of the frigid cold and into the nice welcoming warmth.
Yeah, fair enough. It's interesting because I feel like there's an aspect to this, and let me know if you agree at all, where like it's like ignorance is bliss. Like before I knew that, maybe I didn't notice it because I didn't have the words to put to it and I didn't have like the timing context. But like once I knew that eclipses were like that, I felt it more. I'm like, damn.
I had this conversation last night with a group of astrologers. Actually, it was our Christmas party, and I was chatting with a woman who has like a big Capricorn stellium, and I asked her how she had found it was, and it's across her first and seventh. And I asked her how the 2020-ish was, right? Because of course we had all the big pileup in Capricorn and the eclipses were there and all that stuff. She's like, it was pretty good actually. Like it was like not a bad time for her at all. And now they're in her like fourth and 10th houses, and she's like the eclipse cycle particularly. And she was like, they're awful, they're gross. But she also knows way more about astrology now than she did those few years ago. And so, yes, I do think that there is an element of ignorance is bliss. And also, I do think eclipses will probably affect people who are in the more magical spaces more. So I think, and usually learning about astrology coincides with you also learning more about magic and doing magic, because you got to get the timing to go hand in hand, right? So I do think that's one thing I would throw out there for why I think eclipses you might notice them more if you're paying attention, because you're probably doing more space weather stuff in general.
Yeah, I think awareness is a big piece of it too. Just like, and I think that you're right. Like the more like that we become aware of the currents of like all kinds of different power that flows, we just become more sensitive in general. And I found that to be true in my life. Well, cool. Do we have anything to say before we jump into this? Anything more about that?
Yeah, I mean, we could do. So we didn't do a 2022 forecast because,
right.
Yeah, I don't know. When did you start your podcast?
It was early this year, and then I it was like kind of a slow start. You know what I mean? I had some relocation happen between the first couple episodes.
Yeah. So I mean, doing a recap of 2022, like I don't think we need to do that necessarily. But then, of course, these things are all cycles, and the way I see 2023 is it is the conclusion of a multi-year cycle, but especially the cycle that's been kind of going over since 2020, 2021, especially. That kind of concludes early in 2023. And then there's a major turning point next year where I think things are going to feel and look a lot different than they have. And so I do think that the story of 2023 is kind of a transition year where we're also moving into like a whole new chapter for everything.
Yeah, there is a period in 2023 which we'll get to, which will feel quite weighty, and will probably kind of have the same degree of momentous shift as March of 2020 had, and we'll get to that in good time. But yes, I agree. I think 2023 has there's going to be a pivot point where it will feel drastically different. It's the next stage of it's the next chapter in the story of this decade.
Cool. So kind of going from are we wrapping up the plague narrative and going into the war narrative? Is that what's happening? Because that's what it feels like. And I'm sure there's going to be residue, right? Like that's never over. But yeah.
That's
too clean? Is that too clean?
Yes, it's too clean. Yeah. I like it messy. It's messy. It's going to get messy and confusing.
Yeah. We'll get to it, but I don't think it's the end of the health panic. I think you're actually going to see an evolution of that narrative.
Yeah, and go ahead.
Well, I just we can get to that when we get to that period in the year. But
yeah,
I don't think that story is going to reach is definitely is going to reach a very important step, but it's I don't think that's over.
Because I very much think that like what we're seeing now is how war is fought in the Age of Air. Like,
yeah, it's a mind war.
Yeah.
In many ways, and depending on your mindset, you may feel completely at peace, or you may feel like you are being besieged on all fronts. I do think you're being besieged on all fronts, kind of, but hopefully you can find some peace in that and realize that it is just a mind war. Just a mind war. I mean, that's still. But no, I guess just to kind of wrap it up.
I love that. Can we have a shirt that says "It's just a mind war"?
It's just a mind war. What's your problem? So to kind of bring this home. So okay, we're kind of talking around this, so I think we'll just like dive in. So 2020, of course, the world blew up in a big way. And what happened then? Well, we had the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn. There was actually a huge pileup in Capricorn at the time. The eclipses were there, I think I mentioned, and Mars was there. So it was like this whole big shit show in Capricorn. And Capricorn is like institutional structures, like on a very basic level. So that Saturn-Pluto conjunction there opened a new cycle for the Saturn-Pluto cycle. It was also Saturn really getting down to Saturn town, going through his signs, which we've been in a heavy Saturn period for like almost 5 years now. So Saturn went into Capricorn at the very end of 2017 and will be exiting into Pisces in March 2023. So that concludes sort of the Saturn and Saturn signs for 5 years-ish. Which is good. So all of the war, the pandemic, or whatever is going on, I actually think that 2020 was the worst, and I don't see anything similar to that coming up. Now, is it all going to be like, the age of Aquarius? I hate that. No, it's not. I don't even know what that means. But people are saying that because Pluto is going into Aquarius, and that is the other big story for 2023, right? So I actually do have more optimism for next year and kind of moving forward than some people do, I think, when they look at the space weather. And I do think that there's an element of people feeling burned from how bad it got in 2020. But it is important to just realize that space weather was quite momentous. It was generational. Like, and thank God we don't have something like that again. Like, there's going to be big things, but not quite to that extent.
Cool.
Yeah. It's 2020 was there was just so much in the way of shifts going on, just like epochal shifts. Like the Saturn Pluto is a real like history marker. But then you also had the Jupiter Saturn conjunction. Mm-hmm. Like it was just a big just moment in history. And it's just and it coincided with this decade, and it seems like a lot of agendas seem to be, targeting 2020 to commence some serious projects. Mm-hmm. So there was definitely a very strong and really just dramatic shift forward in a lot of areas. I do think 2023 with the Pluto ingress into Aquarius is going to be another acceleration forward.
Yeah.
So I guess we don't want to jump ahead too far, but yeah, March is a real turning point, to borrow a term from you, Mel.
Yeah. Well, I think sorry, Tim, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, please.
Okay. So in terms of if you're trying to parse out the whole next year, 2023, it is hard to kind of conceptualize a whole year in astrology, right? We tend to talk about these different cycles overlapping and things, and then cram it into a calendar year and call it a day, I guess. But if you're trying to just describe what it's going to be like, 2023 is really front loaded in terms of a bunch of stuff happens early in the year in the first quarter in March, quite frankly. And then, another kind of shift in June. And then there was a few other things throughout the year. But really, that first quarter is going to be like pretty stacked. The first half, even. And then I think that'll give us a good glimpse. I think this first half of 2023 is going to give us some glimpsing into, okay, what is coming down the road. And then I think there's going to be a period of maybe reflecting back for the second half of that year on like, okay, what are we bringing with us? What are we leaving? Like that type of thing. And that is really tracking the Pluto movement into Aquarius. So Pluto takes 248 years to go around the sun. But it also has a really wonky orbit. So it's really inclined off the ecliptic, which means that it goes through some signs really fast and other signs really slow. So it doesn't have a very even passage through the signs. It goes slowest in Taurus and fastest in Scorpio. So we're just coming out of Pluto being at its sort of fastest point. And so it's going to take quite some time now to kind of get into Aquarius and go through that. So just to give some people some dates on that. So we might as well jump into that. So the first ingress Pluto goes into Aquarius is March 23rd, 2023. And he just dips into like the first degree, and then turns retrograde and goes back to Capricorn on June 11th, 2023. And then does not go back to Aquarius until early 2024, January 20th, 2024. So really from that period of like March to June 2023, we get just the first little teaser of Pluto in Aquarius. And so that's really going to be a time to watch. The eclipses fall in there too, so that'll be interesting. And the eclipses are shifting to the Aries Libra axis, so there's a shift there too. So yeah, I think that's going to give us just our first little taste of Pluto into Aquarius. But I think that we're not really going to fully realize what that might bring for a while. So Pluto always takes like 1 to 2 years to go over like fully into a new sign. And so those periods can be, it's just sometimes murky to see what's going on, but sometimes big things can happen. So the last time Pluto changed signs and went into Capricorn from Sagittarius, that was in 2008. You remember what happened in 2008 and 9?
Yes.
Global financial crisis?
Yes.
Yeah. So I've been wondering if we're going to get like a parting shot of Pluto kind of going back and forth over the Aquarius Capricorn. And are we going to get another financial crisis? I mean, things are pretty rocky in that department. So could be
maybe some CBDCs. Let's okay. So since we're just jumping into it, let's just go right into 2023, starting with the first quarter. Nightbirds, I hope you've been enjoying the conversation so far, and there's more to come. But first, I have to ask that you support the show. As I'm sure you've noticed, there are no commercials on this show. There are no paywalls. You get everything up front. For there to be free dialogue here, I think it must remain uncaged by the interests of advertisers. But Nightbird Radio does cost time and money to make, and your support means I can spend less time delivering pizza and more time doing this. That's a win-win. So that's why Nightbird Radio is a value for value podcast. I hope you found value in this show, but I can't and won't dictate just how much. Only you can decide that. But what I can do is invite you to take that value, turn it into a number, and head to www.nightbirdpodcast.com and hit the donate button located on the front page to offer your support. We're also listed on podcastindex.org, which means you are able to send Bitcoin via the Lightning Network using your favorite Podcasting 2.0 apps, which can be found at newpodcastapps.com. And finally, I also accept dry goods. Email me at tim@nightbirdpodcast.com for more information. Sponsors will get a special mention on the show. Thank you for your generous support. Now let's get back to the conversation.
Yeah, January is going to start off messy and confusing and angry because we've got the conclusion of Mars retrograde in Gemini, and at the same time Mercury will also be retrograde. And so with Mercury ruling Mars in Gemini, right? And then with Mercury also being retrograde himself, that is just like angry, confusing communications. It's going to feel like really mucky, and that happens like Mercury stations retrograde at the end of the year, 2022, I should say, so in late December. So yeah, it'll be I think it'll start off. We might be like, what is this year? What's going on? But they both station retrograde or direct, right in the middle sort of January. So I think we're gonna after this sort of fog period over the holidays and into the new year, I think we'll get some more clarity coming in, sort of towards the end of January.
Yeah, I've heard it from multiple places that one shouldn't finalize their New Year's resolutions until mid-January on account of these two retrogrades stationing direct in the middle of the month. It's so there does seem to be a bit of like, yeah, I think coming out of the holidays there will be a lot of uncertainty. Like, I could be something to the effect of like, I think we're dealing with inflation at the moment that's mounting, but it's kind of like people are kind of just blithe about it and not fully aware. And I think there could be this sense of like, going into the new year, it's like, what? How much money did I spend this holiday season? Like, it's like, and like, this is how much things cost now. So it's not exactly sure footing. But yes, there does seem to be this clarification around mid-January. So I find the retrogrades very useful for like self-interrogation purposes. Like, it could be a good time to formulate plans or like test plans, like kind of stress test plans. And because retrogrades are very good for questionings. Like, and I think it could be you could make New Year's resolutions if that's your thing, and then use the retrogrades to figure out, okay, so this is what I'm going to do, so how do I do that? And then finalize your plan by the middle of the month. That's one way of thinking with it. But yeah, mid-January seems to be when things there'll be a clear path, a clearer path forward come mid-January.
Yeah, that's definitely good advice for the individual level. I think on a more broader geopolitical type level, just prepare for communications in general to be like extra spicy. And I feel like that's so cliched at this point, because do we have non-spicy communications ever?
Right.
Like, everything is this flame war stuff going on. But okay, and I hate to bring up Twitter because, oh my God, like, are we all sick of hearing about Elon Musk and Twitter? But it really does capture the Mars retrograde in Gemini thing, all of these big moves happening, and all of these people talking about speech and free speech and who gets to talk and who gets to talk where, and all of this stuff fits that really perfectly. So I see that kind of increasing, honestly, towards like, the end of the year, beginning of 2023, it might reach some sort of like fever pitch, maybe some big incident, who knows, and then things will start to hopefully calm down, sort of later in the month. But it's really going to be, I think, just more of that. This Mars retrograde period is really, I think it actually started off more gentle, and it's been kind of building as it goes on. And then again, when Mercury stations retrograde, which, just to give people dates, is December 29th, 2022 at 24 Capricorn, and then goes to January 18th, 2023, and stations direct at 8 Capricorn. So all through that Capricorn area. So it's almost like Mercury's bringing a final review of what's been happening in Capricorn since, like 2020-ish, right? Like, let's review all of this. And Capricorn being institutional structures, as Pluto moved through that since 2008, he's really shaken the foundations and sometimes like burned it down, of all of those institutions. So finance, health, government, like all of that. So it's a good time to take stock of that for yourself personally. And maybe it will coincide with people. I think people are realizing no one has faith in institutions anymore, right? Does anyone at the end of all of this think like, yeah, I can really trust my government, and I can really, the healthcare system's good, there's a solid foundation? No, like, not at all, right? So it'll be a good time to sort of reevaluate on your own sake, like, okay, what does it mean if I can't trust the government, and the healthcare system is really not reliable, and the financial system's not reliable either? Like, what do I need to start doing differently, and how is that going to really impact me personally?
Yeah. In that regard, that early January could be a good time to get into prepping, in a sense, like kind of learning, like thinking with self-sufficiency, because it's like, you're right, the structural institutions are, they've been quite thoroughly interrogated over the course of these, past 3 years now. So it's going to be, it's certainly, one is kind of has a responsibility to themselves to, have other measures in place to take care of themselves and their families.
Yeah. I also do feel, though, if you haven't started prepping by then, you're gonna like the time to
Oh
prep
yeah.
was a long time ago, and a lot of people have been. I mean, we saw that over the pandemic where a bunch of people who weren't normally gonna do that type of thing is, suddenly stocking up mad groceries and things like that. But yeah, I mean, I think there will just be more and more people realizing, if they haven't
Mm.
already, like, oh geez, like maybe I have to do things differently, and that, yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah,
So
so that's go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, I kind of wanted to ask a little bit about Mars stationing retrograde in terms of like, what does it look like for Mars to now retread over the territory that it was going back in retrograde? Like, you know what I mean? I don't know the proper
Hmm.
term for this, but it's is that the shadow?
Uh, no, the shadow's on the either side of it, of
Okay.
the retrograde. But yeah, so as it's retracing its steps through Gemini, where it
Right.
had, gone previously, turns around, goes back, and then will station direct and go back for one more pass. So yeah, so I mean, after Mars stations direct at 8 Gemini on January 13th, 2023, he then has to go almost all the way back through Gemini, and it won't get out of Gemini until March. Again, another one of those March turning points is Mars finally getting out of Gemini, where he will have been since, it's August? No, September? Anyway, somewhere around there. So for like 6 months, basically.
So we're
Yeah.
kind of rehashing over what's happened in that time.
Since the fall, basically fall 2022,
Yeah.
and specifically in Mars stuff. So, Mars, of course, being war and military and fires and anger in general. And we've really seen that in the US, obviously. Gemini is the seventh house of the US chart. So it hits the natal US Mars and Uranus. So it's quite spicy. And that's also why I think we've seen so much action happening, and military action too, related to the US. Are they technically not involved in the Russia-Ukraine thing? They're kind of like, it's like a proxy war, right? Like we all know they're involved, but they're not, I guess, sending American soldiers there. So
I think there are American soldiers going there, but not like in an official capacity. They're like mercenaries and stuff.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Billions of dollars or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard to know. Like, it's like certainly we would like to be involved. I think that they're gauging the social opinion of that. Like, they're biding their time, So, but yes, like I do think that with Mars stationing direct, like it's worth thinking on a personal level, like what you were going through from like fall, because this is why I find journaling so effective, because you can revisit those time periods. You'll just notice that when retrogrades take place, the things that were going on during the quote unquote shadow period do get revisited during the retrograde, and then get revisited again during the station direct. So there is a lot of things that will, during that period of time, will be brought up again at the mundane and personal level.
Very nice. So it looks like here, like February might be a little bit. Is February kind of chill?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be sorting out from the Mars Mercury thing, so it'll be kind of picking up the pieces of whatever fallout might have been from that. Hopefully, getting on a personal level, energy levels back up to more like steady sort of. That's one thing I've noticed about the Mars retrograde is energy levels kind of are more variable. Where you're like really like, I'm amped up and I'm good to go, and then the next day you're like, I have no energy whatsoever, and I'm just gonna sit and do nothing. So hopefully a little bit evening out and just sorting out, especially in the Mercury Gemini realm that this is happening in, anything to do with thoughts and communications and things that may have gone haywire. Just hopefully picking up the pieces. So February, I think, yeah, there's no major like astrological events per se. It's more just going to be kind of unwinding from all of that. But we're also going to be edging towards all of the stuff happening in March. So I don't know if I would describe it as chill. I think there will be sort of
like the long breath before the plunge, to use a quote from Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, and one thing that does happen, this is technically late January, but it is, I would say, February stories. Venus goes into Pisces, so that might contribute to that, chill effect you're referring to.
That's true.
Yeah.
I mean, that, yeah, Venus is, exalted in Pisces, so she'll be in a very happy place. So there should at least be some sort of honey happening somewhere in your life.
Yeah.
Make for a good Valentine's Day.
Yes, I was about to say. There is this kind of calm before the storm, I feel, with February, because as we get into March, that is when some, the aforementioned momentous shifts take place.
So chill in insofar as the calm before the storm is chill. Great. Good to know.
Yeah.
Which brings us to March, which we already talked about a little bit.
Yeah,
right.
Well, it's hard not to talk about March. I mean, when you look at the transits for next year, we're really looking at like the major outer planet sign changes, of course, the inner planets. So basically everything in from Mars. Mars is kind of on that cusp, depending on whether he's in a retrograde year or not. And so, of course, 2023, he will be, completing a retrograde cycle. Mars goes retrograde about every 2 years or so. So the good news is then we get fast Mars for the rest of 2023 after he stations directing and starts going straight. And fast Mars is happy Mars, so that will at least be good. Mars wants to go vroom, so that'll be nice. Now, yeah, March. I mean, I'll give people the dates and the action that's happening, and then we'll kind of go from there. So, Saturn ingresses into Pisces on March 7th, 2023. Pluto ingresses into Aquarius on March 23rd, 2023, and then Mars ingresses into Cancer on March 25th. So you get like bang, 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 all the malefics, Saturn, Mars, Pluto, all shift signs within like a 2-week period or something. So that is pretty big. And that's going to be noticeable. Like that's just a major, major shift. Saturn does not go back to Aquarius. Once he's out of there, he's done. So he's into Pisces now for good. Mars, same thing, is going to go into Cancer and be there. And then Pluto, as I mentioned at the start of this, will kind of grind back and forth and only dip into Aquarius just briefly until June and then heads back to Capricorn for a bit. So yeah, that March, it's a really major tone shift. And, I wish I could know what that's going to feel like. I have a little speculation. All I can say for sure is the world is going to start to feel very different after March 2023 than it has for certainly the last 3 years. I would say even for the last 5 years, and then maybe even the last 15 years. I mean, that's like, going back to when, my gosh, I lost my train of thought. When Saturn was in Saturn signs about 5 years ago, right at the end of 2017. Saturn not being in his own sign is I think a good thing. So Saturn and Pisces can bring some other problems, and it's gearing up for the next major outer planet conjunction, which is going to be Saturn Neptune, which doesn't happen for a few years, but we'll start to, initiate that period with him going into Pisces. But just giving Saturn like a major loss of dignity, so he's no longer kind of calling the shots, I think is going to be a good thing. So think back to what did the world feel like in 2016, 17, before Saturn went in there. It's hard to say. I think because this is the thing about Saturn is once he spends so long in back-to-back his own signs that by the end of it, you just feel so kind of oppressed and weighty. And you're like, this is always how the world feels. It's always so heavy and dark. No, it's not actually. But we've been in a really dark, heavy Saturnian time. So I'm actually really looking forward to him getting the hell out of his own sign and into Pisces, whatever that might bring. But yeah, I think that there's going to be maybe a little uplift because of that, or at least just not crushing oppression anymore.
Yeah, there's a real totalitarian bent to Saturn, and with him being in his domicile for the last 5 years, it's just been, you've seen the building out of just limits and rules and the strengthening of governance. So Saturn into Pisces will definitely feel there is this other it's almost because what happens is Saturn goes into Pisces on March 7th, and Pluto won't ingress into Aquarius until March 23rd. So I feel like there's almost the way I conceptualize it, it's almost like when the water pulls back after, I don't want to say tsunami necessarily, but a big wave. There's this pulling back. So there's going to be this period where I think it's going to be an almost eerie calm. I don't want to rehash the term calm before the storm, but I don't know. You ever feel that eerie calm before a storm? The bird, why are the birds leaving? What's going on? What do they know that I don't? So, because I do think what Pluto in Aquarius is going to do is going to be quite riotous. I mean, if we look at previous, like Pluto's last time in Aquarius was a long time ago. It's like about 250 years ago, and I think like that's when you had the French Revolution. Is just one example, because Aquarius is like associated with like, you know, groups of people at a demographic level, and Pluto has this capacity to just bring out the worst in things. Like Pluto has this real corrupting kind of influence, and I think what a good example of Pluto in Aquarius and what Pluto in Aquarius can do is the French Revolution, which is like people gathering under a banner but perpetrating extreme violence. And this is something that I think Pluto in Aquarius is going to see. I think we're going to see a lot in the way of civil unrest, because Aquarius is about like the people or the peoples of the world. And so there's a way in which that kind of complements like Saturn moving out of his domicile. Like I feel like this is going to be potentially, over the course of Pluto's time in Aquarius, just violent insurrection, because it's like now the god of like totalitarian hierarchical structure is on bad footing. So I think you're going to see, it's going to be quite raucous.
So like a pendulum swing, to the other direction in response to like systematic oppression is kind of what I'm getting from what you're saying.
Yeah, I think that's borne out in the space weather. I do think that you're going to see, and I think there are some things that will trigger that. Like I was doing a little bit of research. Like I do think that Pluto in Aquarius is going to like that. I think you're going to see, there was that WHO pandemic treaty we're still trying to formulate. And that apparently they have a meeting for that to negotiate what that treaty is going to look like in February. So I think that whatever comes from those meetings, like it's very possible that like I kind of have this vague notion that you're going to see perhaps a new COVID variant or some kind of other, whatever new hot topic virus comes about, but it might be, I think that could take place. And I think that you might see something along the ways of like, another lockdown and, potentially a push for, vaccine mandates. Because, that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction took place very early Aquarius. And I do associate that with like a lot of, the kind of, the health management crisis that we went through. So Pluto's going to be, as soon as he enters Aquarius, is going to be very close to the degrees where that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction took place. It's actually will be within the same degree. Mm-hmm. So I think that's going to be revisited. But I think this time with Saturn not being in domicile, it's going to be, I think people are just sick of it, right? Like I think.
Well, Saturn not being in domicile is where the people get to do the revolution, because the boss is not in control anymore. The boss is busy goofing off with Neptune and Pisces. So like to go into all of that. So Pluto is profound transformation, sort of on a basic level. And I see Aquarius as social structures. It is groups of people. So if we compare it, like Capricorn is institutional structures, so healthcare, finance, education, governmental, just basic stuff. Aquarius is social structures, so family structures, all of the way we order ourselves in our society and relate to one another. And that is really going to be like profoundly transformed over Pluto's movement through Aquarius. You mentioned the French Revolution. And the last time Pluto was in Aquarius was between 1777 and 1798. And Pluto spent the first 2 years of that period, so between like April 1777 and December 1st, 1778, going back and forth between Capricorn and Aquarius. So it's good to always look back and say, okay, well, what happened in history?
Mm.
So the French Revolution didn't happen until 1789 to 99. So it was kind of when Pluto was in the middle of Aquarius. But I mean that it still represented that sort of profound social structure shift, right? So prior to that, you had the king, the monarchy in charge of France, and everyone was just kind of under all of that. And then you had the Enlightenment ideas of like liberal democracy and all of those Enlightenment things coming in. But you also had ever increasing like economic, social, and political inequality. And that's really so what triggered the French Revolution? When we hear about, oh, they got this idea of democracy. And yeah, well, food prices also got crazy high. And when food prices get super high, then you get a revolution. And that is
Yeah.
kind of what happened, right? Like it got so expensive to live that people were like, enough. And they overthrew the monarchy and replaced it with, democracy. And that's kind of where we saw that first really like liberal democracy come into play. And so I think this time around, we're going to see like, I mean, democracy has been talked about for a while, right? And like people are realizing that it's maybe not all it's cracked up to be, or maybe we're not even in one, or so that's really something that's going on. I do find it it's a little scary, to be honest, because you're going to see mobs of people who are going to be really emboldened by ideas, and these Enlightenment ideas. So liberté, égalité, fraternité, so that was the motto of the French Revolution. Seems nice on paper, but let's not forget that after they overthrew the king, we had the Reign of Terror, because, it was this forced equality. And I think of the woke movement, for lack of a better word, and this forced like equality and equity and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, when you get those principles run amok is when you get like enforced, everyone has to be on the same footing and they cannot tolerate any differences of any kind. And so that's like the sort of darker side, I think, of what could be happening there for sure. And we've already seen like a lot of that starting to happen.
Yeah, like I don't mean to say that I'm optimistic about this this revolutionary spirit that will come about, like because the French Revolution was, very bloody and did not have a good outcome, broadly speaking. And I do think that the powers that be do force. I think that there are definitely people in high positions who definitely foresee this and potentially are electing for this and will be weaponizing that kind of violent insurrection spirit. And it's just another interesting thing about Pluto. So I just want to speak to some of the things you were talking about, Mel, like the idea, like food prices increasing, like I have this, I've been thinking for a while that Pluto and Aquarius will have something to do with like the WHO pandemic treaty. And there is a way in which they the timeline for this treaty is supposed to be finalized by February, like spring of 2024, which is actually about the time when Pluto returns to Aquarius. Pluto, I think, returns to Aquarius in February of 2024. So
I think it's January, but close enough.
Yeah. So there's so I could almost see it as like there's like food prices will continue to mount and cost of living will increase between now and then people start getting fed up with that, and then all of a sudden some other there'll be some kind of manufactured health crisis and people will be just freak out because it's like, oh, we have to deal with this again, like the economy's in shambles and you're going to make us lock down again. No, like, so I that's kind of what I see or anticipate. But
I was going to say earlier too, sorry, I'm just going to go ahead and say this before I forget. That so for an interesting point of view on the lockdown stuff, we never got lockdowns for COVID where I am in Atlanta. Mm-hmm. We got lockdowns for civil unrest. Mm-hmm. They put up curfews and lockdowns for that. It was never a COVID thing. So my thinking is, I wonder, no matter what happens, you get the lockdown. So this is like one of the this is how a jail works. You're too loud, lock it down. It doesn't matter what caused the loudness. It could be a rowdy card game, a fight, an argument over food. It doesn't matter. In the end, you get the lockdown. So that's kind of what my outside opinion on that. Anyway, go ahead, Mel.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. And I think that's where you get the Aquarius being groups of people. So it's what are the people doing and that like impulse to try to control their movements and yeah. So definitely, I think it's going to be different in different places, as we've already seen. As you pointed out, you got civil unrest lockdowns. Other places got, I'm in Canada, so we got COVID lockdowns here.
Yeah.
And then in other places, it was no lockdowns, or really. I've already seen, and I can't remember where it is now, but they're trying to do the climate lockdown now, right? Like where you can't drive your car on this day. And actually, I think Mexico City has actually done that for years, where they, you have like whatever your license plate starts or ends in, you can only drive it on certain days of the week and stuff like that. So there's definitely going to be that coming through. So again, it's just controlling movements of people and groups of people in different ways. But with Saturn being in Pisces, coming up to a conjunction with Neptune, now that conjunction does not go exact until 2026, but it gets really close a few times before that. So yeah, it will, it's actually, what's really interesting is Saturn and Neptune get really close to each other in Pisces, but they don't complete the full exact conjunction until both of them pop into 0 degrees of Aries. And that happens in 2026. So they never come fully together in Pisces, but they're going to be kind of dancing together. And I mean, if we think about Saturn being, these like control mechanisms, structure, order, rules, and things like that, and then Neptune is like the dissolution of boundaries. Pisces in particular is where, boundaries get dissolved. So Saturn's going to have fun with that. And Neptune is like illusions and fantasies. So there's going to be a real sense of like shifting, like what are the rules, and the rules of the game are going to get like, people are going to change them part way, or they're going to, like, I think just rules and structures in general are going to get really murky, for better and for worse. Again, so for people who are truly oppressed, this is a time where you can overthrow governments or overthrow tyrants, because you're like, you know what? Those aren't the rules anymore. You don't get to control us. And, here you go, French Revolution, right? But on the flip side of that, it's people pushing boundaries that shouldn't be pushed, that are there for a good reason. And we do need boundaries and structure. So yeah, so that's the flip side, is you need to be careful of that, and just be careful of any sort of mob or crowd situation. To be honest, I'm not going to be going into any like major crowds. Like not that I go party all the time, but just avoiding those situations, because there's a real sort of mob mentality that's going to start to increase.
Could that also bear out in the form of like locally disregarding federal
yes.
laws and prescriptions? Like it reminds me of when I was in New Orleans this time last year, and there were signs on all the bars that said, you must not enter without a vaccine, as per like mandated by the state or the city or whatever, but no one was actually enforcing it. So you have that like weird kind of gray area of like,
and
totally.
that will always
rules,
that will
happen.
To follow them. Like here's the rules, whatever. So on my local level, actually, it's really interesting. So in Canada, we're rule followers, so we all went along with the rules. But Alberta, the province I live in, just passed a Sovereignty Act, which gives the provincial government the power essentially to overturn federal legislation that it deems to be, detrimental to the people of Alberta. So there's also that, like, I think pulling down from a higher federal type level of power and control, pulling it down to more local levels. And so that's again where you're going to see very different things in very different places, because depending on how that place is operating, are they listening to, the powers that be at the top, or are they kind of going, yeah, sure, whatever. And then on day-to-day life, everyone is just doing something else. I think that which is a great opportunity to really evaluate where you're living. And if you're living in a place where, they're following the rules of whatever is being mandated from some people who don't even live in your country, maybe you need to reevaluate that.
That can also get quite Kafkaesque, because then you have people enforcing the rules at their leisure because it suits them, right? So like, I'm not going to enforce this 90% of the time, but I don't like you, so I'm going to enforce it on you.
Yeah. There is a real blurriness with Saturn and Pisces co-present and then conjunct Neptune. Like Mel, you were talking about, like Saturn gets very close to the conjunction with Neptune during the time of Pisces. It's never exact until Aries, but they get quite close enough, I was going to use the term close enough for government to work, but let's say close enough for government not to work. So you're going to see like definitely like this like uncertainty, this kind of like, the Saturnian archetype of control, of governance, of hierarchy is going to be on very, very, very confused and overwhelmed and trying to keep up with everything. And it's going to so the next few years are going to, there is opportunity here to kind of just do what you want, to just kind of bend the rules, because the rules are going to get kind of soupy and hard to enforce, right? They heretofore they've been quite, enforceable. There's been but it's going to get blurry, and there's going to be a lot of ways to just again, do what you want. And it's just so interesting that the Saturn Neptune conjunction finally goes exact in Aries, which is where Saturn is fallen. So that's where Saturn actually does not do well. That's so that to me suggests collapse in a lot of areas.
And that's 2026.
That's 2026. Yeah. So we've got some time, but that is the next major sort of outer planet conjunction that's happening. And so think of, March 2023 with Saturn going into Pisces is the start of that beat up.
So that's interesting, Jack. What you were just saying made me think of so that's a great time for some anarchist magic, right?
I was just going to say my inner anarchist is welcoming this, quite frankly. I've had enough of governmental control. And I'm just totally. Anarchy, bring it. Yeah.
And obviously that doesn't take place in 2023, but it's good to know, to situate what we're talking about in the longer narratives. So I do think that, Saturn in Pisces is going to commence you're going to start to see the wheels of governmental control start to get a bit wonky. And that's something that's going to, in my opinion, continue into 2026. That'll reach an important denouement in 2026 with the Saturn Neptune conjunction in Aries.
Yeah, that's one to watch, but we're, that is ahead of things. So just going back to March 2023. So we talked a lot about now Saturn and Pisces and sort of, the difficulties to maintain order in the face of dissolving order. And then also Pluto into Aquarius. But so Mars going into Cancer. Now, again, this marks the end officially of the Mars retrograde period through Gemini since, September-ish or whatever, 2022. So it's good in a sense of that it gets Mars back on, the straight and narrow, and he's going to start picking up speed, and Mars enjoys that. However, Mars is not happy in Cancer, and Mars going into Cancer is really sort of, I think, a time where people may be feeling especially vulnerable. And so given that we get those major shifts of Saturn and Pluto right before that, I think that March is going to be a time where people are going to be feeling like vulnerable, you're going to be something maybe is going to happen and it's going to be scary. And people are just really going to, I see it as sort of wanting to build their bubble around themselves and just be like, oh my God, and what do I need to protect? And just sort of a sense of feeling threatened on a very personal, emotional home front level. So that's going to be, luckily Mars, only is there for a few weeks. But so that's going to be, I think that initial time period kind of taking us up to when Pluto then dips back to Capricorn. It might be especially emotionally
kind of raw.
For people. I think people are going to start to realize things and more than maybe we already have been, depends on kind of where you are, right? But if things really start to fall apart, or if things just really are, it's so clear that the structure and order and the rules that we've been following don't make sense or aren't enforceable, people are going to start to really lose it. You can kind of see it now. Tim, you're down in a place where you never really had the lockdowns. In Canada, there's still some people clinging to the pandemic. There's still a decent number of people who are masked out in public. There's constant calls for them to bring masks back into the education, to schools and things like that. So there's some people who just really won't let go of COVID. And so I do wonder about that. And again, this is a regional thing, right? It's going to be different, but some people just really won't let go of that. And if they are forced to realize the whole thing we've been told for the last 3 years is kind of a pack of lies, to actually come to terms with that, that's some dark night of the soul type stuff. And if that happens on a bigger level, that's going to be, just try to be there for the people in your life who are losing it.
The danger of internalizing all that stuff is that you build an ego out of it, which I wouldn't recommend, but here we are. Jack, you were going to say something?
Well, it's just Mars's ingress into Cancer is happens within 2 days of basically the same time as Pluto's ingress into Aquarius. So there's a way in which I feel like that ingress is underlining the Pluto ingress into Aquarius, like, because they're just so coterminous that it's like, going back to what we talked about, like last time Pluto changed signs, like going to Capricorn, like there was this, the financial crisis of 2008. And so I kind of think that like Pluto in Aquarius is going to immediately, something's going to happen. Like I feel like there's some kind of, I keep harping on this WHO pandemic treaty, but I do somehow, I'm willing to put my head on the guillotine for this. But I do think that there'll be some kind of like just health crisis in some way to that almost has been elected for Pluto and Aquarius. And the Mars going into Cancer at the same time almost seems like the enforcement of some kind of thing, like, lockdowns and or vaccine mandates. And because Mars is fallen in Cancer, which is, a place not where Mars does not have much strength, like I almost kind of see this as like an ineffectual campaign to enforce these rules, like, because it'll be ineffectual. And it probably, as you guys mentioned, I think it'll also it'll be a lot of like emotional turmoil, Cancer being very emotional and Mars just being, hot and agitating. So I think people's response to whatever happens it'll be a very emotional time. People will be very distressed, and there might be a sense of like can't really do that much about it, right? Like it's like there'll be a sense of almost like impotency, because Mars is kind of impotent in Cancer. But I do think that it's underlining whatever Pluto's ingress into Aquarius. I'm almost certain that there'll be some kind of moment where it'll be like some kind of event, some kind of global event where it'll be like, yes, Pluto and Aquarius.
Yeah, I was thinking about this and wondering. So just to go back, I think the initial dip of Pluto into Aquarius is like there's going to be big things happening with social type structures and whatever that might be, air type things. And then it will just, there'll be crazy things happening. You'll be seeing them in the news or whatever. And it's just going to be like, I'm feeling very attacked personally, even if it doesn't necessarily affect you on your own level. And that's the Mars and Cancer, just taking it home, even if it might not even have any bearing on you. So I was wondering, I don't know if we'll get something maybe when Pluto goes right into Aquarius. We may get something actually after Pluto goes back into Aquarius or Capricorn, pardon me, in June. And then after, because I was looking at the last time, so Pluto, when it went from Sagittarius to Capricorn. So it ingressed Capricorn in January 2008, pardon me, and went back into Sagittarius June 13th, 2008. And then the bankruptcy of the Lehman Brothers was on September 15th, 2008. So Pluto was actually at the very end of the last sign that it was just starting to move out of when we got what's considered the official start of the financial crisis. Now, obviously, those dominoes had been stacked up for some time, but the Lehman Brothers bankruptcy was really like the finger pushing the domino that just sent the huge cascade, right? And then Pluto didn't go back to Capricorn for good until November 2008. So just after that. So I'm actually really looking at the second half of 2023 is potentially maybe we get sort of something Pluto related big happening. Maybe. And I know that totally flies in the face of what I think I said at the top of this, which is that, all the actions in the first half and then the second half will be like sorting that out. But who knows? Maybe it will be, we get these shifts happening and then we get like a conclusion / a start of something else, which is, the conclusion of Pluto's time in Capricorn. I don't know. Maybe. Could be.
Do you want to get in on the conversation? I've teamed up with Numinauts to offer you the opportunity to do just that. For only $1 a month, you'll get access to Numinauts.club, a Mastodon server for animists and artists that brings together the Nightbird Radio and Soapbox podcast communities. Just click the link that I've provided in the show description to get started. Now let's get back to the conversation. So let's use that as a impetus to move forward into the second quarter.
Eclipses. So the
Yeah.
eclipse season really starts in, so the first eclipse of the year is April 21st, 2023. It's a solar eclipse at 29 Aries. So that marks the shift of the eclipses going into Libra and Aries instead of Scorpio and Taurus. And then the second one is May 5th, 2023. It's a lunar eclipse at 14 Scorpio. So back to that axis. So eclipse season happens in the spring there in the second quarter. And, we get a little one that happens in 29 Aries. So it'll be like kind of poking that side of it. Because the nodes are shifting. And I think the nodes shift over the summer. And I don't have that date in front of me right now, but I'll pull it up for later.
Change signs on July 17th.
Okay. Yeah. So they're shifting from Taurus Scorpio into Aries Libra. So the eclipses kind of move out of that. So the eclipses being across Taurus and Scorpio really highlighted Uranus and Taurus, and then all of the things that represented like the instability of the things that should be fixed and stable, represented by Taurus. And then also because Uranus was square to Saturn, that whole time Saturn was in Aquarius. So it was like the constant push and pull we've seen for the last some years. These are the rules. No, screw your rules. I'm going to break your rules. And then like just constantly like here we're going to put it this order. Oh no, that order has all been destroyed. Right. So that's ending now with Saturn going into Pisces. And then with the eclipses, like there's still a little bit of that instability in the eclipse cycle, with it being in half of them are happening in the sign where, either opposite or where Uranus is. But we will start to see that shift away into the Libra and Aries axis. And I think maybe hopefully, me, I hate eclipses, but there's less happening across the Libra Aries axis for a while. So I'm hoping maybe that means eclipses get a little less juicy than they have been, quite frankly.
That would be nice.
So yeah, it would be.
Yeah. One way to think about you can definitely see like a war peace axis with Aries and Libra, like Aries being, Mars ruled and Libra being Venus ruled. Like they're definitely, in thinking with that nodes change, like I definitely see like the impetus is towards conflict, because the North Node is about, where it's desire, it's kind of where the energy is heading towards. And so with the things going on with like, war that's been transpiring over the last like year, 18 months or so, it's definitely interesting that you see this this node change around that point. So that I do see that as an acceleration of the war story. It might not be immediately, but it definitely is going to put the energy, I think, towards conflict on a global scale.
Yeah, it's interesting to think of it in terms of it's still in Mars and Venus signs, right? Like we're going from Taurus and Scorpio, which is sort of the night houses of Venus and Scorpio, and it goes into their day houses, so into Libra and
interesting.
Aries. Yeah. So it kind of moves it from like out of the dark into the light, so to speak. But it's still that dynamic between Mars and Venus in a big way. So watching them around that time will be important too.
So would that be like, that almost brings to mind like a shift from covert action, clandestine attacks on infrastructure to like something a little hotter?
Yeah.
Could be. Yeah.
Track?
And yeah, it does. And so there's so much with that. So like so I have a Libra moon. So I'm like, yeah, Libra, we're about balance, but like, we're not necessarily always about peace per se. No, there is a sense of wanting to maintain harmony or else, though, I would say, as someone with that natively. And like, let's not forget Saturn is exalted in Libra. So, there is that level of like, these are the rules and we will enforce them for everyone's good. Now, luckily, Saturn is a long time away from Libra, so we don't have to worry about that per se. But yeah, so war, I guess I could see like just sort of like outward type of manifesting, I guess, of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Because you're heading out of the nodes, like even it is a Venus-Mars axis with Taurus and Scorpio, which is what we're having right now. But it'll act the rulerships will change sides with this nodes change. so the North Node is currently in Taurus, which is Venus ruled. So like, and you can kind of see that in the collective with just people just kind of being like, well, I just want food, like, and food's increasing in prices. And like, I just want to, people are, I think, much more concerned with necessities and taking care of themselves and their families at the moment. And then I think that node change with the North Node going to Aries is going to be, people will be much angrier at that point. And it could also be that now that I'm thinking about it aloud, it's kind of like it kind of goes with that Pluto into Aquarius, that kind of the riotous kind of quality that we were describing before. Like, I think people will get kind of angry. Like, it's not that people will be less interested in getting foodstuffs and taking care of themselves, but it's possible that that'll contribute to be like, okay, now I can't get my food, so who do I have to blame for this?
Yeah.
And potentially
yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that could potentially be weaponized in the sense of like, well, it's like, we don't have food because so and so did a cyber attack on us, and now, and so they'll try to direct that people's anger towards and try to channel it towards a war campaign, potentially.
Yeah, could be, but again, with Saturn being in Pisces by this time, I think they have less power to direct the mob energy, like, I think, because that's the thing about mob energy, is it's going to be unpredictable and uncontrollable to some degree. So yeah, I mean, I've certainly gotten actually angry in the grocery store in recent months because of how expensive things are, and I don't see that changing. Like, I don't know if you've experienced that, either of you, but it was just a few weeks ago. It was the first time I looked at the price of something and I went, are you fucking kidding me? Like, I was actually really angry that this is now what I have to pay if I want this thing. And some of the things I was looking at, one was toilet paper, and I was like, what? Like, I need to buy that. So yeah, so when the staple goods, and that's just toilet paper, I guess you don't need that technically, but food, right? When you're looking at the price of anything, pick one, meat especially, people will be getting angry, and people will also be like suffering and not being able to actually feed themselves properly and things like that. So it all leads to revolution eventually.
Mob directed anger out of hunger and out of need, I can see being just as those are
the other thing we didn't talk about actually is Jupiter. We should talk about him because he's he's our good guy. If we want to look at some silver linings and stuff. So Jupiter starts off the year, sorry, I'm just backing up my.
Before we do that, if you want to look it up, I need to take a restroom break.
All right, let's do a break.
Want to hang out with other night birds and soapheads? For only $5 a month, you can gain access to the Polytechnic of the Numinauts, a private Discord server for artists, animists, and searchers that brings together the Nightbird Radio and Soapbox podcast communities. Just click the link I've provided in the show notes to get started. Now let's get back to the conversation.
Jupiter goes into Aries at the very end of 2022, so right before Christmas, on about looks like December 20th. And so then Jupiter is going real fast for like all of 2023. Like, he rips through Aries very quickly and then gets into Taurus, sort of in that second quarter. I'll get the exact date up here.
May 16th.
May 16th. Perfect. Yeah. So the second quarter, then, I mean, we have our taste of Pluto in Aquarius. We got some eclipses going on and the shift happening there. And then we've got Jupiter going into Taurus. So I think that's good. Like, I think Taurus like Jupiter's fairly happy in Taurus. And he can bring some, hopefully, good luck and optimism into those areas. Now, the flip side of that is Uranus is there. So this is gearing up to a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction that will happen later in the year. And I know sort of the main hot take is, Jupiter is expansion. So when he conjoins Uranus, we get expansion of, Uranian chaos and disruption and things. Certainly could be. I tend to think of Jupiter as being a little bit more balanced than that, though. I think Jupiter is going to try to help. Now it may not work, but I do think that we'll get some help with all the issues happening in the Taurus realm, like with the unstable food and things like that. I don't necessarily see that being a deflationary quality though. So I don't see that helping with the food prices, not continuing to rise per se, unfortunately. But there may be some other unexpected boons that come out of that.
Yeah. It's one interesting thing about Jupiter and Taurus is that it will be entering into sextile relationship with Saturn. So there's a part of me that wonders if that won't correspond to some degree of rationing, just because it's, Saturn in relationship to Jupiter in the sign of like food and material goods, so it could be about limiting in that regard, but potentially in at least an attempt to be helpful.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's an interesting take on it. We also get, with Pluto going back into the end of a Capricorn, now it'll be by sign, not, by exact degree, but we get Jupiter and Uranus in a trine relationship to Pluto, again, across Capricorn and Taurus. So, trines are considered like a supportive aspect, but what are they trying to support? Well, it's, profound revolutions in the food sphere or the other things that are supposed to be stable. So so I mean, it's an interesting thing to watch for sure. I have to admit, I haven't fully wrapped my brain around the Jupiter Uranus conjunction in Taurus and what that might bring, because there were just all these other things to look at in the year. But Jupiter will be trying to help with that type of thing, and it's going to just be a question of what can he accomplish in that spot.
Yeah. And it might just be what ostensibly looks like an attempt to help. There was Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius. One result of that was the COVID vaccine, right? And that was ostensibly an attempt to help, but judge them by the fruits they bear, sort of thing. So that was, again, something that was advertised as something to help, but was in fact, not exactly as advertised. Yeah. And I wonder if, Jupiter conjunct Uranus in Taurus could potentially be something along the lines like, the bizarre fake meat type of thing, like that gets, rolled out for, widespread distribution or something along those lines. Like here's some fake, here's some synthetic meat that we've grown. Mm-hmm. It's like a plant. So it's ethical, and but it gives you mad cow disease or something.
Oh God, yeah. So the Uranus and Taurus is definitely aligned with innovations in the food industry. So it was in there in the 30s, and so there was some big shifts that happened around then, and with agricultural practices, both good and bad. You got massive monocultures happening, monocropping and things like that. But you also, it was actually really tied to the advent of biodynamic farming, which was the total opposite of that. So, again, good and bad, right? There's going to be innovations, but they might be Frankenstein meat, which maybe you shouldn't eat. Or I guess it's maybe if it's not going to outwardly hurt you per se, but it might not sustain you the way you would, hope that it would.
Now with more prions.
And I just realized that the reason I didn't actually go too deep into why the Jupiter Uranus thing is because it doesn't go exact until 2024. It does get close. They kind of come up to each other a bit. But the actual conjunction doesn't happen until next year.
So will we see maybe a taste of what that will mean?
Oh, totally. I think we will. Yeah. Because Jupiter's going to kind of get pretty good into Taurus before going retrograde. So yeah.
Yeah, Jupiter, I think will put at least attempt to help in terms of the food crisis, and it's and there's I was reading something that apparently Jupiter has like, there's some notion about secret dignities, about planets having secret dignities. Like it's like Jupiter like doesn't traditionally have much in the way of dignity in Taurus. Like it's peregrine technically,
Mm-hmm.
but there's some notion that like Jupiter's seems to do well in Taurus, and potentially
Yeah.
has some kind of perhaps undiscovered dignity in Taurus.
So
And
yeah, I think it's the moon connection personally. Like I
yeah,
think the reason I said I think Jupiter is kind of happy in Taurus is because the moon is exalted in Taurus and Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, the moon
mhm.
sign. So I think there's a connection there where yeah, like even though he's peregrine, I think it's a better place for him to be than maybe Aries, I would say, where I don't really see him helping really with too much.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But,
Yeah, so I mean that kind of takes us to like the second half of the year, I guess, and we've been
Yeah.
kind of talking all over the place. But so again, Pluto dips back into Capricorn in June, and then come July, I would say one of the big stories is Venus, who has a retrograde period, and that starts
July 22nd is the start of the retrograde.
Okay, yeah. And this is in Leo. So, yeah, Venus will go retrograde for a few weeks through Leo. And that'll be sort of over the summer period and into the early fall. So, Venus goes retrograde every 18 months. It's not like a crazy rare thing by any means. And it usually tends to hit, I would say, on a more personal level, just with Venus being a personal planet. And so it'll be a time period where you will, look at your Leo house in your chart and what Venus and the Sun is also located in your chart as well, with, of course, the Sun being the ruler of Leo. It's a very solar, obviously, retrograde for her. I was thinking about this in terms of what does that mean for the kings of the world, right? So, and I know like I've heard all sorts of things about maybe they're just unfounded conspiracies, but hey, I love those, about how King Charles is not actually going to be crowned, so to actually have a coronation, which should happen sometime next year. I don't know if it's been scheduled yet. But yeah, I don't look like Charles is not popular. And if food prices keep going crazy, and I mean, Pluto and Aquarius, it kind of brings to mind like French Revolution, right? Like they were mad at the king because he's the leader. And when things get shitty on a personal level, people get really mad about that. So yeah, I mean, that was just my initial type of impression with that. I mean, and with Venus, it brings into mind partnerships of all kinds, right? Like what is that on a personal and global level, right? So yeah, time to sort of reevaluate partnerships.
It makes me think of the strength card for some reason. There's like a kind of a, I mean, is that just me?
What, like with the lion and
She's holding the mouth of the lion.
Yeah,
no, Venus retro. I like that. Yeah, because you've got the lion is a very solar type of archetype, Leo, obviously. So, and then with the woman there being Venus, yeah. So it'll also be a time just on a personal level. Venus retrograde periods can be tricky for relationships and specifically exes and things like that coming back, or so just be mindful of all of that. It is over the summer though, so hey, could be a good time to have some flings or something. Enjoy your life, even if everything else is going crazy. But yeah. Oh, it's May 6th. Okay. Sorry, while we were talking, I just looked up. So there is a date booked for Charles's coronation, Saturday, May 6th. Okay, so we'll see if that happens.
Interesting, yeah.
Interesting. It'll be before that retrograde for sure.
Jack, thoughts on Venus retrograde in Leo?
I was thinking with it a bit. It isn't something that I've been paid attention too much, because there's so many other things, like a lot of my attention went to the other transits we were talking about. But there's almost like this kind of like, since it's taking place in summer, like I kind of almost get like a fuck it we ball kind of vibe from Venus retrograde, like just because it's like I think so much is going to happen before then that and people are going to be like, okay, well, what now? And then summer comes along and it's like, well, these are the ways that I've historically enjoyed myself, because Venus being about enjoyment and pleasure, it's like, and then perhaps that retrograde is about, well, it's like with whatever transpires earlier in the year, it might be like people thinking about like, well, what are the ways that I can enjoy myself now? Like, it's like maybe like prices have increased to such an extent where, usual leisure activities become prohibitively expensive. And so it might be like kind of think, well, how is it that retrograde might be about rethinking ways of enjoying oneself? And I got the impression that it's kind of happy. Like it's not a sullen retrograde. Like it's not like Venus retrograde in Virgo. It's like it's kind of, I don't know. It seems
fiery.
kind of, it's
Venus
fiery.
in Leo wants to be seen. She wants to go out and have a good time. So
it's got Babylon energy, man.
Yeah. And it is also co-present with the sun. So and there'll be a Kazemi actually on August 12th. So I think it actually looks kind of pleasant as far as Venus retrogrades go.
Yeah. I mean, Leos, buckle up, because you're heading into some I won't say what I was going to say. It's very rude, but no.
No, go for it. I'm interested.
I was just going to say you're heading into fuck summer, so
Yeah, like
hell yeah.
Because I think it'll be about like thinking about what is actually enjoyable, and does it have to cost a lot? Like I think it's going to be like fuck it, we ball.
I like it. Let's see. Anything else on that before we move into?
I don't really have anything else about that. Yeah, I mean, what's next? So what's next is the rest of the year sort of plays out, and there's not too many fireworks. You get Mars kind of chugging through. Pluto will be back in Capricorn. Saturn will be chugging through Pisces. So it's all going to be kind of like, okay, let's get used to those, those things. Saturn and Pisces in particular be a good time, sort of once Mars is kind of clear out of the way and things, we can kind of get more of a vibe of that. And maybe something, maybe Pluto wants to do something in his last little round in Capricorn. That will be, we'll have to see what happens there. But yeah, then the second half of the year, I mean, we get the eclipses in the fall, and those will be kind of like the biggest sort of maybe events, I would say, at that time. Yeah. Because again, Jupiter doesn't he gets kind of close to Uranus, but then goes retrograde. So, that will be at play, but it's not, it's not like the full thing happening. So, yeah.
There is something interesting, is that Venus stations direct on September 3rd, and then Jupiter stations retrograde on September 4th. So there's some kind of relationship, I think, there. Like once whatever kind of like rethinking about pleasure and enjoyment, like kind of reaches a conclusion with Venus stationing direct. Like I kind of think like it's, it'll be okay. Well, that's what, recreation means for me now. And then Jupiter stationing retrograde to be like, well, now what do I do about like material goods? Like, what does it mean about like, keeping body and soul together type of thing. So I don't know, that I feel like that means something, the fact that the two benefics station around the same time, one direct and one retrograde. I feel like that bears mentioning. That means something. I'm not entirely sure what, but
yeah, and Jupiter of course will be in Venus's sign too, so
yes,
so her stationing direct at that time is actually kind of a good thing for whatever Jupiter got up to, while he was getting close to Uranus there. So hopefully she can keep it on an even keel. And then really it kind of takes us into October, and we get the eclipse cycle again, right? So October 14th is the solar eclipse at 21 Libra, and October 28th is the lunar eclipse at 5 Taurus. So those are heavy Venus. I mean, both of those are ruled by Venus, so it's definitely like a big, she does kind of get more into the spotlight in the second half of the year because of the eclipse cycle and her retrograde. So, by that point, she'll be, well past her retrograde period. So, which is good, quite frankly. And yeah, it's, so again, it'll be pay attention to all of those Venus things in your life, and those might kind of come under the gun during the eclipses. And again, we do see that shift of the nodes will have moved then into the Aries Libra axis. And so then we get so then we get for good almost, I think, is there one more in the Taurus Scorpio next in 2024? I can't remember. No, I think this is the last one that happens there. So then it's into Aries and Libra.
Yep. And as for what I notice is you have a Mars is going to be in Scorpio late this year, and will be opposing Uranus and having a Cazimi around the same time. And that strikes me as somewhat significant. We'll see how that transpires, but that looks kind of that looks pretty volatile, and it's like the renewal of of conflict, perhaps, with the Cazimi. It's hard to say exactly, but I do feel like it's worth mentioning that opposition and Cazimi seems
that solar eclipse, the one at 21 Libra. So Mercury is close by, and it's a south node eclipse, and Mars will be at the first degree of Scorpio trine to Saturn at 0 Pisces. So there's a very tight trine between the two malefics, so Mars and Saturn. So it does kind of have that quality to it. I actually like the fact, though, that Mars is in Scorpio and not in the sign of the eclipse, which is in Libra, right? I kind of want him out of the picture, and he's much happier in Scorpio than he is in Libra. So I'm just kind of hope, and maybe, the trine to Saturn will keep Mars kind of under control a little bit for that. So that's my optimism for that one anyway. So could be worse, I guess, is what I'm saying. I would be much more apprehensive if Mars was conjunct like the South Node or something, for example, like in Libra at that time, which is not happening. So yay.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second one, so the second one is, pardon me. So that one is in, wait, where am I looking here? In Taurus, of course. Yeah. And that one, again, the moon will be really close to Jupiter, which is nice. That's quite lovely. Again, it will be opposed quite tightly to Mars. So Mars is bringing some fire into that, and we'll be with Mercury. So, watch your mouths at that time, I guess. But, the eclipses, I don't know. They don't seem as bad as the ones this year, but I'm also Taurus rising, so I'm very biased against the eclipses that were happening across my first house.
They blasted me.
House. Yeah.
12th house.
Mm-hmm.
And Uranus is still doing a dance on my moon. It's just like moved in. Just I live here now. Like
chaos is where you live.
Yeah. Which is great. I feel like it's been really like, oh, you want to just have a profound transformation every 6 months? Can be great, but can also be pretty tiring.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, going up to the end of the year, things are they just chug along. There's nothing too major that happens. It'll be then 2024 becomes the story of Pluto in Aquarius for good. And then, that's when we'll really know, okay, what is this going to start to be about here?
Yeah, I can't help but see that Pluto in Aquarius as with a transhumanism.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be some of that. Again, social structures, right? And what's a human and what's, a person. The other thing I did want to point out, and I don't think I mentioned this yet. So at the last time Pluto was in Aquarius, we got the Enlightenment. So the Enlightenment gave us some democracy, and there was a scientific revolution, and it was really the rise of science. It was like Descartes, right? It was the Cartesian, I think, therefore I am, the split to wholesale materialism. The church lost a ton of power. And we, for the last 250 years almost, we've had that sort of heavy, rational, materialist type of mindset. And so with Pluto going back to that, I actually, I have some optimism for let's maybe revisit that model. And how's the materialism been going for the world, and not obviously I'm very biased as an animist. So I actually think it might be a good thing, where we can kind of revisit the things we came up with at that time and can kind of say, okay, so Enlightenment ideals, what works, what doesn't work, right? And let's maybe
Yeah.
come up with something else.
Because I think transhumanism, like, just on my gut, I don't think it works, right? So
Mm-mm.
maybe that is, us seeing that, but like the pangs of that are kind of what worry me, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Some
there's
lessons come hard.
definitely yeah, well, I mean there's definitely that like subset I think of people who are so terrified of death they want to stick their consciousness in a robot so they can live forever,
Right.
which like I find completely horrifying, but I'm not, I guess I'm afraid of death as far as, I'm an animal, so we have like an instinctual fear of death, but on the grand scheme of things it is natural and needed and not something to ultimately be afraid of.
Well, and that only works in a materialist cosmos, that downloading
Yeah,
your brain into the
yeah,
computer. And we don't really like, that's not where we live.
that sounds like a prison, quite frankly. If it works
Yeah.
in any kind, it will be a prison for your soul. So I'm not
Mm.
really into that. Yeah, I guess the other thing we didn't mention with the Pluto and Aquarius thing is we also had the American Revolution the last time Pluto went
Right.
into Aquarius. So that was between 1765 and 1791. So it started before Pluto
Right.
went into Aquarius, but that, so it definitely was happening, and the peak of it was happening right around that. And of course, so yeah, you got the Declaration of Independence in 1776, which is right before, like, Pluto was at the very end of Capricorn, just like he is now. And so there's been all sorts of, talk in the U.S. about that, and speculation about what, because the U.S. just had its Pluto return, and what does that mean for that nation? And so yeah, I really think that that Pluto going into Aquarius will be big for the U.S. in particular because it's just passing through its return. And yeah, I think I saw something recently like Trump had a copy of the Declaration of Independence in a storage locker with some like old socks or something. I don't know. It was just really funny. Like, like what an image for this document that's like, the foundation of this country, and you just whatever, like just toss it in
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
That's very poignant, actually.
Hmm.
Yeah. I definitely think it's Pluto and Aquarius is going to see various factions in the world try to enact their visions for the future. And I do unfortunately think it'll get ugly in a lot of ways. Like that just seems to be a capacity that Pluto has. Like Pluto kind of has this ability to just take something and, like, because I've kind of come around to the idea where there's like a debate as to whether or not Pluto should be considered a malefic. Like I've kind of landed in the Pluto is a malefic kind of category, and its main capacity is to corrupt. And it's I think that you'll see across the board just people try to enact, because Aquarius is very much about the future, like that kind of Capricorn. Like Capricorn's very associated with the past. Like they're two Saturn rule signs, Capricorn and Aquarius, and you can kind of see with Capricorn and Aquarius being adjacent, like it's about that kind of is speaking to Saturn's rulership over time. So Capricorn's about the past and Aquarius about the future.
Mm-hmm.
So it's I do think that there's a lot of people have an idea about what the future should be like. And I think you're going to see a lot of different groups of people like try to get to make that happen. And I do unfortunately think it'll get kind of ugly.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's that enforcing of egalitarianism and things like that, right? Where this is our vision and you have to agree to it or we'll cut your head off. Yeah. I mean, on the whole though, like just to pull back, I generally am optimistic. Yes, we're going through some things that I didn't think I would go through in my life, but here we are. But generally speaking, I don't see a world war, put it that way. Like I don't see bombs falling in the skies like across the world. I don't see that. Bombs will fall in some places and are, as they have since we invented them. But I was looking at some of the transits to try to to actually see like, okay, when World War One started, what was going on, and are we going to get that again? Well, not really. So World War One started end of July 1914, right? And in 1914, Pluto ingressed into Cancer. So again, it was a Pluto ingress, brought in that. So you go, okay, well, Pluto ingresses are big, but that also coincided with a Saturn Pluto conjunction in November that year. So again, it was amped up extremely because of that conjunction. And Cancer like being kind of like the home front and things being fought that way, right? So it was Saturn Pluto actually, they conjoined in 1914 and again in 1915. So while the war is going on, and so that actually gave me some heart because we're done with the Saturn Pluto. Like we had that in 2020. We're moving past that. So that's a good thing, I think. Pluto ingressed into Leo in 1937 to 39. That was the outbreak of World War II and the end of the Great Depression. So again, though, there was a Saturn Pluto conjunction in Leo on August 10th, 1947. So it was kind of in the middle of just after the end of World War II, but it had been, kind of coming into force. So again, when you have Saturn Pluto, that's when you see things like world wars and pandemics and all of that break out. And we are past that in a big way. So I think that what I'm trying to say is like, take heart, people, because, even though we have a Pluto ingress and those can certainly be profound and transformational, I don't see it being as bad as like World War I and II, for example. And I hope to not be proved wrong in that because, yeah.
And I fall somewhere in between those two where I think that I am maybe pessimistic on a geopolitical global level, but I'm optimistic on a personal level. And a good example for that, and I think me and Jack were talking about this recently, but a good example for this is for 2020 for me was a great year. It was like one of the best years of my life. And people hear me say that and they're like, what are you talking about? That shit sucked. And I'm like, well, it doesn't, just because chaos is swirling all around me and on the world stage doesn't mean I can't live my best life. It doesn't mean I can't thrive, and that doesn't mean that I can't win the mind war if there's a winning there. Or maybe the best winning is not to play, to quote war games. I do think there's an aspect to which World War III, the battle, like I've said this before and I'll say it again, like the battleground is you. And this version of imperialism, they want to colonize you, your body and your mind. The optimism there is that I have the ultimate say over what happens in my body and my mind. I hold sovereignty there. So I'm optimistic there. I think that I think that we're in control there. So that it can only, if World War III is happening in my body and in my mind, they can only win if I allow them to win, maybe is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. And if there's going to be a war, I would look at, honestly, 2026-ish, like that, that Saturn Neptune conjunction at 0 Aries, like that's pretty intense. So yeah.
And then like Uranus going into Gemini has always been quite tumultuous for the US. And so I just want to speak to the optimism thing, because I don't want to be too because I could just make some dire predictions and but I feel like I've been feeling a responsibility to maintain optimism, like that. There's that saying, optimism is a spell. Like I think we do need to maintain that, because it's like it's there, like us. I feel like astrology is 100% accurate, but it's not 100% descriptive. Like there's a lot of different ways that a transit can manifest, and there's good and bad expressions of transits, like even unpleasant ones. Like there's still like a constructive. So I do think that optimism is so important right now, and I've been really just trying to sit with only resourceful thoughts lately, and it's really quite helped. And I think everyone has a responsibility to maintain optimism. I think we need to dream a better future, and and kind of just dream it into being.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that didn't sound too hokey.
I love it. I love it.
I agree too. And again, I do feel like coming out of this heavy Saturnian period, it's so easy to fall into like depression and despair. But I see the silver lining, and like I'm not going to totally devolve into platitudes here, but like it ain't all bad. It really isn't.
I'm looking forward
and
to
also,
it.
I think it's going to get really weird, again, in good and bad ways. Like the flip side of that Saturn Pisces thing is, I think there's going to be coming up to Neptune. There's going to be some like dissociation happening on a big level, and I think we already see it. Like, I know just with the way the media is so captured, and you can now easily compile a soundbite of like 20 different newscasters from across the country saying the literal exact same sentence, like word for word. So there's clearly like this script coming down from wherever. And then it's also just, media doesn't have the resources to write its own news at a local level really so much anymore. It's all just kind of coming down from these national organizations and stuff. So you're seeing that and being aware of it. Again, it's very Orwellian, right? Because it's like it's new. Is it Newspeak? It's called in that book, where it's just they say one thing and then your reality is completely different, right? Like, and if you're not captured by the fear of, say, COVID or whatever. Me not being afraid of COVID was fantastic for me, but then every time I read the news, it was like, what world? Like, this is a different world. They're living in a different world than I am.
Yeah.
Like, and that's a really tough thing to deal with on an individual level. If all the people around you are like, oh my God, COVID is so scary. Oh my God, we should lock up and we should like keep our kids away from each other forever. And I'm like, what? What are you talking about? Like, I feel the complete opposite. So it's,
The reality schism is real, and I think only widens, whatever that looks like. You can already, like, that's only widening, and it's only like it just seems like it's upside down world. Like, we're firmly in the twilight zone. There's no going back, but that old Winston Churchill quote, when you're going through hell, keep on going, like, applies. And when you're going through clown world, keep on honking that clown horn.
Yeah. But again, like it's not necessarily hell. Like, there's a lot of opportunities. Like, there's a lot. This is fertile ground for opportunities. A changing, like, there's a lot. Just there's some quote that I read that I saw. It's a bit of a platitude, but it's words to the effect of, like, if you focus on shit grows. If you focus on opportunities grow, something to that effect. So, but yeah, just look for the opportunities, because and it might not be, like, it's what you make of it. Like, you can just make the best of what's to come.
Okay, so with that in mind, and as we close, what are we looking forward to enchanting for in 2023? What do y'all have? Any targets? Any
enchantments?
Yeah, for enchantment.
Interesting question. I've really been trying to do a lot now with this current lunation. I just feel so pleasant. I haven't really calendarized anything in the way of like magic necessarily. I've been doing a lot of like new thought kind of stuff, and that is not super like, I don't necessarily elect for that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, Mel, if you have any thoughts, that'll potentially buy me some time to answer that question.
Yeah. So like you, I haven't come up with any like a specific set of targets or whatever with that in mind. I mean, given the structures and the shifts of things, you could enchant for like finding a safe and happy place for you in society, like whatever that looks like. So focusing on how you fit in the collective and how you participate in that, given all these Pluto and Aquarius crowd situation type things. So how can you best operate in the crowd? And maybe that's you're not in the crowd and you can find a safe grounds away from it. But yeah, safety in crowds, and a place in a crowd, a place in society, I think too, is big where, people not feeling like they belong is a big problem, obviously, right? Like that, this alienation factor. And so if you're going to enchant for something, like focusing on this idea of coming together for the greater good of all, that's always going to be a great target. Yeah, I just on a very sort of broad strokes level.
Yeah, I like that.
I mean, yeah, and you mentioned, Jack, fertile ground. I just thought, ooh, that's a really good keyword for Jupiter and Taurus. So there's probably lots you could do with that Jupiter and Taurus, even again with it not having tons of dignity, but I think there's a connection with the moon there. I'll have to do some more digging into actual elections, but I feel like you could probably find some targets where if like the moon is in Cancer, or, Taurus even, and, with Jupiter, like I think you could probably get some abundance in those Taurus sort of physical things with that. Like definitely focus on that, especially if you're lacking, like if you need to like get some stuff, like some physical stuff, then I think you could use Jupiter and Taurus for that for sure.
Yeah, it's I think a good area to target in terms of enchantment would be rule bending and or breaking, because as we described with the
Saturn and Pisces will be good for bending the rules to get your way.
Exactly. Yeah, and like being able to manipulate the system. It'll be very fluid. The system will become very fluid, and will be very absent-minded. Like I do think magic, insofar as magic is probability enhancement, like I think there'll be a lot of opportunity to get away with a lot of things that you at other times wouldn't be able to get away with, and magic I think will certainly be able to push on those levers.
I think a good example of that, so they're talking about doing digital IDs and tied to maybe health passports, whatever that looks like. But the government sucks at building technology, and it's often broken. And I've heard stories of people trying to get through the airport, and the app wasn't working. So, the guy's just waving you through and not actually checking anything. Yeah. That's the kind of target that's like, those will be a thing with Saturn in Pisces. So lean into that. Like if you need to just enchant for like the bureaucracy sucks, so I don't have to show my papers. Whatever that looks like, something like that. Nice. Right?
Yeah. Invisibility magic might also be good.
I was thinking invisibility magic too.
Kind of ties into the position in a crowd thing, or I don't have a position, I'm invisible to crowds, because if you're invisible to the crowd, you're not a target. So
just judge. That's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it could be a good opportunity to fake your death. Just be legally dead.
I love it. I always lamented that was difficult to do these days,
Yeah.
But it's coming back, baby.
I don't know. Is it though? There's so much surveillance everywhere.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah.
I think that, like as I don't know, maybe, and this is just me spitballing on that, like maybe because the more that control structure grows, like the more cumbersome and unwieldy it gets. So like if you think about like a cyberpunk dystopia, like there are actually rife possibilities for like manipulating the system to become a different person. I think that's a trope there. So maybe we'll see. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But that's great, awesome stuff, guys. Anything else?
No, I think we definitely gave people a lot to chew on here. So
yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for coming on, y'all. I had a great time.
Thanks for having me back on.
Yeah,
thanks both of y'all for coming back on. Any promotional stuff that y'all want to go over at all?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So come to my site if you want to hear more of my astro talk. So it's melpriestley.ca. I do consultations, and I also do a lot of blogging and posting. I don't have any of my 2023 writing up yet, but that is one of the projects that I'm really feeling like I need to get up now. So this podcast is the first of that. So yeah, I will be posting stuff about, next year and all sorts of other stuff regularly.
Awesome.
I intend to launch a website before this episode airs. I have not come up with a name for it. I just have a general intention to launch a website where you can book a consult with me. I'm also going to be getting into talisman creation. So look out for that.
Well, awesome. Thanks again, guys, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Yeah, you too.
Hey,
and the rest
thanks.
of your 2022.
Yeah, good stuff.
Cheers.
Take care.
I also wanted to add real quick that as of the time of the publishing of this episode, you can find Jack at jacksteiger.com. That's JACKSTEIGER.com to book a consultation with him. Do you experience weird shit? Do your parents not like to tell their friends about what you do in the woods? Do you make more friends in a graveyard than you do at a party populated by living humans? Do you have interactions with beings that are not strictly considered human? Do other people look at you like you're crazy when you mention talking to trees in casual conversation? If you fist pumped or even just answered yes to any of these questions, you may be a nightbird. So let's sing together. If you'd like to come on the show and flap your gums with me, share your stories, or just talk about the malleable nature of reality for a while, then send me an email at tim@nightbirdpodcast.com. That's tim@nightbirdpodcast.com. I'd love to have you on the show. But until then, I gotta fly. But before I go, let me say this. Remember, you are never alone. I believe you.